Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast. Good to see you. Today on the Firefighters Podcast, we acknowledge our brothers and sisters from the NHS. We've got an operational paramedic, Eddie Williams, on the show with us, and we're going to talk about what it's been like during the last 10 months, out there on the front line, out there supporting us, out there keeping us safe when we needed them the most. This is such a powerful episode. If you're one of those people, just like me and my family, out there Thursday nights, clapping away, acknowledging their bravery, their commitment, their service to us, and keeping us safe and sound when we needed them the most, you're going to love this episode. What's it like to be a paramedic? What's it like to be on the front line? How do you get into the service? What's the training like? What resources have they got? What kit have they got? And how have they kept it up for so long? We are once again sponsored by the wonderful William Wood Watches. If you don't know who these are, where have you been? Head over to williamwoodwatches.com and check out some of these beautiful watches. If you want to carry the spirit of the Sire Service with you on your wrist, and if you want some of the money to go to the Firefighters charity every single time you make a purchase, then get over there. This is a really powerful episode, guys. I know you're going to enjoy it. If you've always wanted to show your support and you wanted to hear what it's been like for them on the front line, then listen in. I really appreciate you coming back. Thank you for spending your time listening to the podcast, and I hope you take value from every single episode. Let's get in there with Eddie Williams. Eddie Williams, welcome to the Firefighters Podcast.
Thank you very much.
How you doing, brother?
Yeah, good.
Fantastic. I wanted you to come in because obviously since sort of February of this year, many members, listeners of the podcast, but also just the public in general, have been given a massive amount of appreciation for all of our NHS staff because, I mean, everybody's been going through the pandemic. Everybody's been going through some real challenges personally, financially. And it was great to see that everybody got into this sort of habit of acknowledging things that we perhaps always should have acknowledged. So your role as an operational sort of paramedic working in the UK, I wanted to bring you in just to give people that sort of look behind the curtain, look behind the scenes of what does it look like, a day in the life of a paramedic and what's involved in the job. So how long have you been a paramedic for now?
So I've been qualified as a paramedic for 6.5 years and did a couple of years student before that.
6.5 years you've been in the job?
Yeah.
So I remember when you joined, and my daughter's, she was only 2 or something when you went. I can't believe it's been 6.5 years because you didn't start out life as a paramedic. You had a sort of military career or RAF career before.
Yeah, so I was an officer in the Royal Air Force. It was all kind of a bit of a strange story really because I went through university and joined the University Air Squadron, which is like part of the RAF Reserves. Then from there kind of went into the RAF. I applied as a weapons systems officer.
What does that do? Weapons systems, that sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, so essentially sat in the back of an aircraft, whether it be like a Nimrod, which is a big thing that just flies around doing intelligence type stuff.
Okay.
Or
with the cameras on the bottom of them.
Yeah, sort of. And then, or the other option, which was obviously what I was aiming for, was to fly in the back of a Tornado.
Tornadoes?
Yeah, so...
Wicked.
Yeah, so that was the big kind of idea, and then... essentially dropping bombs and blowing stuff up, but obviously
which is awesome.
So so I know it's kind of very different vein of work, but yeah, the main kind of reason I wanted to get into being a paramedic because I always wanted to do something for the greater good, and the Air Force kind of fitted all those T's as well, but obviously in very different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where people can struggle with when they talk about finding their big why. When people ask me what I do, I kind of say just like I help people. Whether it's fire service, whether it's podcast, whether it's coaching and fitness, it all fits under that, like you said, the same sort of core why. And yours is, delivering the greater good, being part of something huge, which is able to make a difference, even if only in a small sort of incremental way on a day-by-day basis, which is exactly what you do now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm in a massively fortunate position at the moment, and I just go into different people's houses all the time, see these different walks of life. It's such a privilege to see that, and people to let you into their lives and their kind of best and worst moments in their lives, and hopefully you can just make that difference. And that's
and often it is. I always say to people, when somebody's ringing 999, they've probably never done it before in their entire life. So taking the sort of impetus to actually pick the phone up and make that call, obviously control operators and stuff, and we've had a few on the show talking about how incredible it is to receive the call. But for you, every time you arrive, similar to us, although it's very different to a fire, because we often arrive as part of a team.
Yeah.
You do operate as part of a team sometimes. There'll be two of you on, but you've done a lot of, you've done a team leader role as well, where you've been out in a car by yourself. What's it like arriving those times when you've been on your own?
Yeah, so I've been here a few years now, doing a few different roles. So I started off on a full-size ambulance, with two of you, with your crewmate, and then you properly learn your ropes then when you're first the paramedic and you're not a student anymore, and you realise you turn around and there's no paramedic standing behind you. I'm it now.
Yeah. And with all due respect to the other individual, they used to be called like EMTs, didn't they? But does that exist anymore?
Yeah,
it didn't for a period.
Technicians we've got.
Technicians, right?
They did kind of get phased out for a little bit where I work, but they've thankfully brought them back in because they are, exceptional and they've got wealth of knowledge and stuff, and it's great to have that support.
It was a shame for a time, wasn't it? Because they've got a massive skill set, but for a time they were kind of treated like a glorified driver, which they're far more than that.
Definitely, yeah.
But the sort of onus was very much placed on you as a paramedic to be the.
Yeah.
And I suppose it is to a certain extent now from a legal perspective that the onus is placed on you from you're all the decision making.
Yeah, so I mean, so that's the big difference, I suppose. So technicians aren't registered, whereas we are registered.
What does registered mean?
So we conform to the HCPC, which is the Health and Care Professions Council, which is our
is that where you're taking
professional body. Yeah, so you have a standards of proficiency essentially that you have to live up to.
Okay.
Like ethics and all that kind of stuff, but that's like legally accountable.
Yeah. Okay. So the book stops with you eventually.
Yeah. Essentially, yeah. So if you do anything wrong, it's the HCPC that come and tell you off. And you have to pay for the privilege.
Why did you make this decision? Tell me about your thought process at that point. So how long had you been in the job before you had to go out as sort of on your own, even if you were a driver or a technician? How long had you been in before it was just you?
So when you qualify and you get your registration with the HCPC, I think I did something like 150 hours with another paramedic, just because you've
which isn't a lot when you break that down into shifts.
No,
because you do 12-hour shifts, don't you?
Yeah. So it's about 14 shifts, something to that effect.
Which is nothing.
Yeah.
How many did you do a month?
Between 12 and 14, something like that.
So that's one month.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've done all your studying. Not letting you loose for nothing. You've done all your uni. You've done all your placements.
If I'm completely honest, I did feel kind of ready at that point.
Okay.
But as soon as you walk into that first house or that radio goes off on that first call, you think this, like the kind of jitters kind of went through you really. Yeah. And you think, oh my God, what is this call going to be? How am I going to be able to handle it and that kind of stuff? And that reality of that, the book stops for me.
I remember the first, because one of your, I don't know how early on it was, but I remember not too far into it, you delivered a baby, didn't you? It wasn't too far into your operational career. I remember you coming back and saying you.
I'm trying to think. I've delivered a couple.
Have you really?
Yeah. So
I speak to paramedics. Some of them haven't delivered any.
Yeah, well, it's some people are like maternity kings as well. Every week they're just popping out. And
magnets.
But I've honestly, I try to stay away from that. But
what on earth is that? I mean, obviously people know what giving birth is like, but I think most people's perception of giving birth happens in a theatre where it's lots of doctors. Not that you're any more or less qualified, but delivering them in a non-hospital environment must be. I think
the big difference with kind of our profession, obviously we are not midwives, simple as that. We get. I think I did 2 days training on
2 days
on maternity. With the course that I did.
What was that? Just keep baby alive, basically. Keep baby alive day 1, day 2. Keep mummy alive.
Different kind of manoeuvres about getting the baby out if they potentially get stuck and that kind of thing. So there was obviously quite a bit in there. It was quite intense couple of days, but
I suppose many of the principles applied with general care of a human, for want of a better description, because if any complications arise, you would treat them perhaps like any other patient, I would imagine, to a certain extent. My very limited experience with that is, obviously, we do a certain amount of care within the fire service, and all I ever remember is, if mummy dies, baby dies.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So keep mummy alive.
Yeah.
Same with because you always say, I'm not sure if we defib somebody if they're pregnant. I'm like, no, you defib them, because if mummy dies, baby dies.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So ultimate care is still going on with Mummy, I suppose.
Oh, yeah, well, that's it. You've got 2 patients, haven't you, in reality?
Yeah.
So, obviously your patient A is your mum until baby arrives, and then you've got 2
So
patients.
how did your first one go?
So unfortunately, I was actually with another paramedic. So I was working. She was working on a car, and I was still on an ambulance at that point. And so I backed her up. She was great. So I had kind of a paramedic to hold my hand as I went through my first one, which was lovely. And you do all your training and stuff, but I think even at that point, I hadn't even had my own children.
Really? You've got children now. You've got 2 children.
Yeah. So it's kind of, I hadn't really witnessed anything like that. And you think, and then you just go in and like, you're the professional, everyone's looking at you and you've got a job to do. And it is what it is, but you just kind of, you know what you're expecting. But I think now I've kind of, I think, is it 2 or 3 that I've done now? But you know what you're getting yourself into, and you kind of,
yeah.
Yeah.
It must be quite surreal though when you step back after it's all happened and you're like, that's a baby. As stupid as it sounds, you're like, oh my God.
Yeah, absolutely amazing.
A baby is here and it wasn't here 10 minutes ago.
Yeah. And and to get that, it's that, that ultimate kind of job satisfaction, isn't it? Well, you can't get better than that than bringing kind of life into the world.
The world, yeah. Because I suppose a lot of the time it's the other end of the spectrum with your work.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly can be. Yeah, but it is, and and especially in the family and stuff, they're always so grateful, and it's a real kind of privilege to be invited into that kind of scenario, really. And touch wood, and hopefully it kind of stays that way. I've only ever been to good deliveries and
good births
and stuff like that.
Because people forget there's we've obviously been a lot more exposed to it. Things like the Channel 4 program, One Born Every Minute, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That it doesn't always go as well as that. But again, only a very small part of the work that you do. So during this past 7, 8, 10 months, or whatever it's been now, your role has gone through some massive changes, as has everybody's, as mine in the fire service. We are currently in the midst of hopefully coming out the other end, but nobody can quite make their mind up, of a pandemic, obviously COVID-19. Your role, much like many of the emergency services, we've had to put lots of provisions in place, but ultimately there's no days off. So you need to keep going.
And absolutely, So I'll tell you a funny story. So when Boris Johnson first announced, on the very first day, he said, if you've got a continuous cough or you've got a temperature, you must isolate 14 days. Yeah. All this kind of stuff. That very first day, my little boy had a temperature. And I was like, oh my God. It was 37.8 as well. It was like bang on the money.
Yeah.
And I was like, he's probably just got a cold, he's he's like 3 years old. It's probably just completely normal. And I rang my boss and I said, look, this has happened. And he's like, you're going to have to isolate. And I'm like, I don't want to isolate. I want to go to work. Like more than ever.
Because your partner's a teacher as well. So you're both key workers. So, I mean, not you're the be all and end all, but a hit to your community. You both do the jobs that you do because you want to contribute to the larger community. And
exactly. I mean, I felt devastated that I couldn't be out helping, and especially at that time because there wasn't like mass testing like there is now.
No.
So within that whole, I think I ended up getting symptoms of a cough or something like that at that point, and so I ended up having 12 days rather than 14, I think. But it was crazy, I didn't get tested at that point. So
for anybody that's not actually self-isolated, you're kind of unique in that you are within the emergency services. So if remember the public gets symptoms, they'll probably just like check the government website and self-isolate as best they can. What was your process of doing it? So obviously it was very early on really. So it was a case of obviously you can't go anywhere. So getting supplies and stuff from your family, food and all that kind of stuff. How do you keep yourself busy? What do you get up to? Obviously, you've already got kids, so you can't be too much extracurricular activity. Luckily, obviously, the weather was pretty good. So just cut the grass every day. Yeah, fortunate enough to be out in the garden, Because your work's not necessarily one you can do from home. You tend to be out on the ambulances. I know your partner will have got a lot of stuff done, but it was just bizarre time, really bizarre. But we kind of got through that bit, and if I'm honest, I was just glad to kind of get back in because I just wanted to get in the fight really because I could see my colleagues at work and you think, well, they're going to be short-staffed and all that kind of thing. And then because you guys have been struggling long before, I think people have been more appreciative now of the work that all members of the NHS do, but the ambulance service in particular, and we might as well come onto it now, have been not necessarily struggling with recruitment, but certainly understaffed would probably be the nicest way to put it. Long before COVID, long before any pandemic. There's kind of a balance of it, isn't there? Because I think
it's all well and good just throwing infinite, paramedics and technicians and money at the ambulance service and stuff. But in reality, I think a lot of it is actual education of the public, when they should be calling an ambulance, in terms of some people think a life-threatening emergency is a life-threatening emergency, and it's clearly not,
No. We have it to a lesser extent, but yeah, your perception and someone in the public's perception, and we're not necessarily discouraging people to call 999 by any stretch of the imagination. If you sincerely believe a life is genuinely at risk, pick the phone up every single time. However, there are many, many occasions when, whether it be police, fire service, I think fire service get it easiest. I think the police and certainly yourselves get the highest number, I wouldn't say hoax calls, but perhaps unnecessary.
No, it's just about the education, really, helping people understand the different pathways out there, like, your walk-in centres, your GPs, they've out-of-hours services, 24/7, 365 days a year, and people need to be aware of that, and they can access them if they need to. But, I think a lot of the problem with the ambulance service is we try to be totally risk-averse.
Okay.
So we try to get to everybody and treat everybody, but then you haven't got infinite resources.
No.
So if you had less people calling in the first place, then you could actually be able to prioritise properly. Obviously, clearly we do prioritise jobs anyway.
But unlike the fire service, so we have a lot of time to run drills, to do a lot of training, do a lot of risk work, hydrant work and all that sort of stuff. We have other duties that we perform.
Yeah.
I remember when you telling me about your training. I mean, I've been out on ride-alongs with you, and as soon as you hit that button, available, you're out again, pretty much every single time. You don't, not that fire service have downtime as such, but you don't even do a lot of training. I mean, obviously you're well trained, but I mean, your CPD is nowhere near what I believe it perhaps should be. Obviously you do your job well, but you don't get a lot of practice.
So this CPD is a thing we have to maintain ourselves through the HCPC, as I mentioned before. So every couple of years they randomly audit, I don't know how many it is, however many thousand paramedics.
Yeah.
You have to send your portfolio and show you've basically met certain criteria and
you have to just maintain that yourself. So
yeah,
in your own time, booking on courses and
So there's that side of it, and then
not your own time though. You must get toil.
So that's our own time, because that's my responsibility as a registrant. But then,
really,
yeah,
wow,
yeah. But then obviously,
that's not in the small print.
Yeah, so then and you still have to pay the HCPC. It's amazing.
That's great.
Yeah. So, but obviously, my employer then puts on courses every year. At the moment, obviously a lot of online stuff, but we still have had a little bit of obviously practical stuff with using the PPE and all that kind of stuff.
But the amount of complexities of people's physical conditions these days, because I mean, we could go into so much depth, but the mental health aspect. So predominantly, I would say a lot of your training, and correct me if I'm wrong, is predominantly about the body, keeping people alive.
Yeah.
But how much do you get called for things like mental health disorders these days?
So nowadays I work on a fast response car.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to get sent to less kind of mental health and that kind of stuff.
But somebody's going.
Oh yeah. All the time. It is, and I still go to it occasionally, and occasionally I still work on what I would call a crew, full-size ambulance.
What can you really do as a paramedic though with mental health? Obviously you care.
Yeah,
you're interested in the person's, but you can't really do anything when you're there, surely.
Well, it's about that, giving support if that person is in crisis, giving them that emotional support at the time, and then signposting them to, the most suitable place. And we're lucky now in my area, we have direct access to kind of mental health units and stuff like that. And we've also got kind of mental health triage cars go out. So there's a police and a mental health nurse go out in a car together.
Okay.
So we can ask for kind of backup from them if there's, obviously more complex cases. Because, again, it's like the maternity thing. We're kind of a jack of all trades, really.
Yeah.
And you have to know so much about everything. It's just, it's absolutely minefield. But I think as long as you can talk to people, it's just about having that conversation. I think the more you kind of deal with mental health, the better you kind of.
Now, I suppose the other side of the coin as well is, and I'd be interested to hear how much mental health care goes on for you as an operator, because in the fire service, I mean, it's probably only been the last 3-4 years. Somebody might misquote me, but we've got things like mental health first aiders, we've got trim practitioners, because obviously we go to a lot of trauma and car crashes and fire, obviously like that, a lot of trauma in terms of casualties. But you guys your exposure level is far higher, I would say, than ours.
It's very frequent. Certainly.
What mental health care do you get as an operator, as a paramedic, if you will?
Yeah, so in fairness, I think my employer is very good. There's lots of different things they do, and from your kind of occupational health, we have trauma as well, so trauma risk management. So if you went to a traumatic job, then somebody should contact you a few days later, just see how you get on, and then you can have a full-on kind of assessment. The ironic thing is, so I trained as a trim practitioner, whatever it was, 3-4 years ago now, something like that. As I had a couple of years.
So it has been around a very long time. It started out in the military, didn't it? I think it started out, I don't think the Afghanistan War or something like that. It was, again, when you see a lot of these advances in any sort of care, it usually has come as a result of somebody that didn't get the care. And I think when we came out of some of those traumatic events, we really missed a beat.
I think a lot of our kind of technology and things we do comes from the military and war zones and that kind of thing. So that's kind of the one kind of positive thing that comes out of these wars and things, I suppose. Yeah, so I'd gone down this route. So I spent a couple of years in management, still as an operational paramedic, and did this trim practitioner course. And it was only kind of when I was doing this course that I realised that I've probably been suffering from some of these things in terms of after certain incidents, in terms of sleep deprivation, stress, getting kind of aggy and grumpy and all that kind of stuff. And you think all these things are kind of potentially signs of not necessarily PTSD, but certainly post-traumatic stress.
I think that's put on a little bit of a pedestal, and I say it with all due respect to anybody that's suffered with it, but PTSD hasn't got to be something enormously glorified that is book worthy. People hear PTSD and they hear of these, I think people have a perception of some incredible explosion at war that is going to cause PTSD, but even non-emergency services people you can have PTSD from a violent interaction in the home. It hasn't got to be emergency services or military related. And I absolutely would agree. Members of the service have experienced PTSD, and no doubt you will have yourself at times.
Well, I think, so when you say PTSD, you kind of the disorder side of it means the kind of the more long-term effects, where I would say, this is obviously my only kind of anecdotal kind of information, I suppose, in terms of, I would say probably 99% of people on ambulance probably have suffered with post-traumatic stress, not necessarily long-term, but certainly in the short term.
Do you think it has a compound effect on the number of crew? So, for example, in the fire service, we usually operate as a minimum of 4 personnel on a fire engine. And I think it almost gives you a, not easier or harder, it gives you a different processing mechanism through the fact that you can discuss it and perhaps dissipate it. Not trying to normalise it, but at least recognise it and talk about it as a group, as a team. Whereas if you're in a team of 2, or even if you're on your own.
Yeah, I work on my own a lot now. I know, and if I'm honest, I quite like that most of the time anyway, which is fine.
You are very hard to get on with, to be fair.
Yeah, a lot of people say that. It's quite weird. But, I mean, the ambulance service itself, I'm sure the same with the fire service, it is just a big family in terms of when you're back on station and stuff. You just talk about stuff, and everybody's been through different things, whether they're not the same thing, but similar things and similar experiences that have made them feel in a certain way. So you are kind of very supported by your kind of ambulance service family, really, which is the biggest thing. So most of the time, I've never personally kind of accessed our support
mechanisms,
mechanism, coping strategies and stuff, because most of the time I just feel like I can cope with it myself, and with obviously help and support from my colleagues as well. But I'm sure at some point I possibly will, and I think nobody's kind of unbreakable, and I think
no, absolutely. It's not a character measuring competition. It's not it doesn't make you strong, weak, or anything. And sometimes it can be the most innocuous things. I've got colleagues that have dealt with some really traumatic things, and it'd be years later. A close friend of mine recently left the service because they were struggling to cope with an incident that had happened maybe 5 years earlier. And they went to another incident where nobody had been hurt. It was a car crash, and there was nobody in this one. The person had self-extricated, got out of the vehicle. And it was they don't even know what it was about that, but something in that environment, whether it was a deja vu, whether it was what, they don't know. Something just triggered it off. Something just, it's the old straw that breaks the camel's back, or whatever the saying is. It's something so small. And these things are festering inside a lot of people's minds. You won't realise it's there until it's too late. I would say I've never necessarily formally accessed it, but I don't think it has to be because even when we talk about mental health, just as a person-to-person member of the public, it hasn't got to be something really formal where you get out a booklet and you write a form out, or you make a specific request anywhere, or you ring a certain phone number. Mental health, check-in or just mental health care or awareness is just as simple as a question. You said about, I don't think I've ever accessed it, but I've certainly spoken to the crews and this, that, and the other. That to me is a way of accessing it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, yeah.
The more you can make it part of a day-to-day conversation, the less it stigmatizes it as he wants to talk about mental health.
That's kind of the big positive. There's a lot more awareness about it now, and people and organisations are much more aware and supportive of mental health, and it's particularly in the likes of the fire service, ambulance service, police, and those kind of things where you are going to see those traumatic kind of incidents.
It's part of the role. It's part of the role. So we were saying about moving into this pandemic. I think that's had a real compound effect on everybody's mental health. But for better or worse, large percentages of the public have been able to rightfully so protect or self-isolate or distance from other members of the community in our roles, and certainly in your role. That's not been an option. So what provisions in terms of change of ways of working or PPE, what's happened in the sort of UK NHS paramedic world? Yeah,
so obviously straight away when kind of the pandemic started, well, in fact, I say straight away, there was that initial kind of borderline time was, we're wearing masks, we're not wearing masks.
What's supposed to do, yeah. What does it say today?
Bit weird, isn't it?
Every time we went in, there'd be a new newsletter and we'd be like, you don't do this, you don't do that,
I remember
being
on station at the start, I say the start of the pandemic, when it was in China, and, there'd be a case of COVID and somebody would be on base and they'd say, there's a COVID case coming in type thing, you're going to go to it, and people are like, woo, type thing. And it sounds terrible,
I know, yeah. Is there really one? Has he found one?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And it was like, especially at the start, they were taking it, the hazardous area response team, they were going out to it and all that kind of stuff. It was bizarre, really.
Yeah.
And then
people
now,
in big moon frog suits.
Yeah, and now it's just like the norm. Yeah, and
we certainly had the same, where we have obviously tip sheets that come out with all the information. You get all of yours on like your MDTs on your tough books, don't you?
Yeah.
But we still get some hard copies in physical paper form. And sometimes, when it first came out, it would say in the subtext, COVID confirmed or COVID not confirmed at this location. And then we ring control, we ring our control service and say, well, what's happening? We're going, are we not going? Are we this, or that? Oh, well, go so far and then we'll speak to them and then put this on or put that on. But you get to the point eventually, and I imagine that's kind of where you guys got quicker than we did, where it's, look, you've got to go. You've still got to go.
I think a lot of the people kind of realised on their own backs, really, that, I think initially the guidance was, if you think there's a potential risk for COVID, then, wear your PPE. But then obviously you go into some houses and then someone will have a temperature and you think, I haven't got a mask on now, so I should be wearing a mask.
Yeah.
So, quickly,
is it too late now? Or
it's a minefield, isn't it? So we quickly kind of got into our own minds that, just we need to wear PPE all the time, really. And then it came officially from like the organisation, as it were.
Yeah. So when you talk PPE, what, because most people, we all get masks, we get the idea of public wear masks. Nitrile gloves, some people will like wear it, they don't wear it.
Yeah, so basically rubber gloves. An apron, which is essentially a chocolate fire guard.
Yeah, I saw you in that big suit. You saw a photo.
No. So that's the other, like the next level.
Oh,
so we've got two kind of levels. So level, I don't know why it's called level 2 and level 3, not level 1 and level 2, but there you go. So level 2 would be your gloves, apron, mask, and goggles. And then as soon as you put your goggles on, they steam up, so you can't see anything.
Magic.
Yeah. And then level 3 is when you have a full...
How does the patient look? Oh, I don't know.
Yeah. Sorry, where are they? This way, yeah.
So Marco, Polo.
And then level 3 being like a full-on white suit, and you've got a hood, and basically you look like an astronaut.
So what is level 3? A confirmed case?
No, so if we're doing any what we call aerosol generating procedure, so if somebody is in cardiac arrest and they're choking or something like that, and we're going to be directly exposed to
the breath coming out.
Yeah, the kind of respiratory droplets and that kind of
stuff. Aerosol
stuff.
generating procedure.
Yeah.
Magic.
Yeah, I don't know who thought of that phrase.
I bet they got a promotion for it.
Yeah, probably.
Aerosol. I think we've had that, to be fair, because we obviously had a few amendments with our CPR procedures. Not that we rarely ever do them, to be fair. But if someone's choking or you're like, oh, they've just started choking. Give me a minute. I just need to go and get stage 3 on. Well, how does that even work? Surely by that time it's too late. You've got to get involved.
Yeah. So the way it works on a cardiac arrest, so if you get called to a cardiac arrest, the first responder goes in level 2 PPE. So basically, as I explained before, your basic level of PPE.
Do you travel around in that all the time then?
No.
So you've still got to stop and do that.
There is still that delay of kind of when you.
Because we always get told you can't get dressed on the way, guys. You obviously got to wear seatbelts. Got to wear seatbelts on the way, but you're also like, well, you want me to stop then? I'm going to stop and pull over and put all my kit on and then get back on and then.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you get there and the social, the moral pressure to act now.
Yeah, definitely.
Just give me a second. I just need to get off and do my stuff, which we all do, but it's not really most practical. But you've got to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think particularly at the start of the pandemic when we didn't really know much about COVID and potentially how dangerous it was going to be and who it was going to affect and that kind of stuff, I think we were all pretty keen to kind of not get it really.
There was that double take moment, wasn't there? Was for me where I was like, is this actually going to kill everybody?
Yeah.
I was like, I've got no idea, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. There was
this isn't funny anymore. Not that it was funny, but it was like, this could really be the thing.
Well, that was it. And everyone was kept on mentioning that. Was that Contagion, that film?
Yeah, I know. And then you'll start going, no.
Yeah. Like the monkey.
Are you sure?
Yeah, the monkey
Somebody
that
died?
dropped a bit of food and then all of a sudden like 6% of the population died. Like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was that kind of...
Especially because you had children then, and that's when it starts. Not that no parents or non-parents, if you haven't got children, and nobody's any more or less important, but sometimes it just gives you a different perception of what you're exposing. I know before I had children personally, I was much more...
Absolutely. If it was just me... then
send me anywhere. Go on, put me at the tip of the sword. I'll go and do it.
If it was just me, and I'm not talking about cross contamination with other people now.
No,
I'm just talking about just me. If it was just me that was going to get poorly, I wouldn't be that bothered.
Yeah, I know.
But the fact
because that's kind of part of the job. I know it's not part of the job. You're not supposed to be put in harm's way, but it's the same with us.
That's what you do it for.
Like, we're really trained, and we've got all the PPE, but we're also going to go into a building that's on fire.
Yeah,
we are accepting a certain element of risk.
Yeah,
but like you say, you go home.
You're going to
try
and kind of negate that risk, obviously.
Yeah.
But I say it just gives you that heightened awareness. I would say if for me when I've got children,
Did you ever have those moments where you were like, because I know there's been a few paramedics that during the pandemic have either they've experienced or felt they've been exposed and have started to stay away. I know a few of your colleagues have moved out of home.
Yeah, so going back to April now, I ended up contracting COVID. Luckily, touch wood, myself and all my family were absolutely fine. But I essentially spent, especially that early on in the pandemic, you were trying to keep cases down. You were trying to keep people at home rather than going into hospital and treating them in there, which you potentially would have done in normal circumstances.
Yeah.
So I spent probably about an hour and a half in a small lounge with full PPE and that kind of stuff, full level 2 PPE, which is what we are advised to wear.
Yeah.
With these two elderly couple who were both coughing away. They were okay, but both coughing away, but they needed a bit of extra support in terms of, because they were just both exhausted. Yeah. Needed some kind of care support. So I spent, I say an hour and a half with them. And
was that just like fluids and trying to just get them feeling a bit better?
Just trying to, I was speaking to an out-of-hours doctor and literally getting carers to come in to support them over the next few days until they kind of, hopefully...
That must be quite hard to try and get carers in, especially during the pandemic. I mean, because some carers are provided by obviously government funded, but there's a lot of private companies that operate in that industry and they must all have a different set of rules each, I don't know.
Yeah, it's always kind of quite difficult to get that kind of thing, especially at kind of last notice. As it happened, the out-of-hours GP ended up coming out after me anyway. So just to kind of see if there's anything else going on, I think.
So how soon after that, you were in this lounge with these for an hour and a half and then...
Yeah, so probably within the next week. So I'd obviously still been going to work because I hadn't had any symptoms. I felt a bit tired the day before, but didn't really think anything of it.
Shift work, innit?
Yeah, you work nights and all that kind of stuff. And then went to work, and in the afternoon, I just thought, don't feel quite right. So I did my temperature, and it was like 38.3 or something. And
for anybody that's not sure what their temperature should be.
Yeah, so temperature should be 36.9.
Yeah, so it is anything over a sort of degree higher is verging into a bit of a fever or something.
Well, so obviously the government put 37.8 on it, don't they, as the kind of landmark for you should be isolated type thing. Yeah. So at this point, I was out on standby in my car. And then, so obviously we got the thermometers in the boot. So I just went to my boot, took the temperature, and then thought, oh my God. So obviously it had to then ring control. Yeah. And then it kind of dawned on me, especially because we were still in that early stage of the pandemic when we didn't know how it's going to affect people. You know? And I thought...
You've got very young children at home.
Yeah, I thought straight away, you know, I don't know, kind of.
But ultimately, you don't want to be thinking, look, is this going to kill my little boy? Have I brought something home with me? Is what I'm suffering with?
That's where I was going. Yeah, so because I had a temperature, and it would be very, very rare for me to get a temperature. I just thought I've got COVID. I'm certain of it. It'd be highly unlikely for me to get a temperature because I just don't get.
You're pretty fit and healthy guy. You don't get ill very often, no.
So then obviously I ended up ringing control, saying I have to go home. Blah blah. Rang manager to get stood down. Then ended up ringing my wife, and then I'm like, I just said to her, I don't want to come home. You know, it was that. Which
is rare, you know. You don't say this every shift.
Yeah.
I don't want to come home. I'll just come home.
I normally get in trouble when I say that. Yeah.
So you didn't want to come home. Was she aware at the time that you...
Yeah, so I obviously told her I got a temperature. So I drove back to base. I kind of thoroughly deep cleaned my car as best I could. And then left, essentially. It was all a bit weird. And then I went and sat in a lay-by for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Trying to work out what I could do, where I could stay, and all that kind of stuff. And obviously I was speaking to my wife in the meantime. And
how did she take it?
She's always been fantastic and very supportive of me generally. And, you know, anything we kind of do, we would tackle together really. But
so you can tackle it together, but also you can't in that sort. Obviously you make decisions together, but...
Yeah, so at the time they were offering people accommodation, but only if they were asymptomatic and kind of going to work. So if they had like a vulnerable partner or something like that, if they wanted to stay away from them.
What does asymptomatic mean?
Without symptoms.
Okay.
Yeah. So as in somebody who probably hadn't got COVID, so they were offering people hotels and stuff for NHS workers when they at that point, and
okay,
all that kind of stuff. But because I then had symptoms, there was just no accommodation available basically.
You could still give it to other people though. So why would they not provide you with a provision to self-isolate? Or were they just encouraging you to do it at your place?
Yeah, to do it at home. Yeah, essentially because they weren't. They didn't have anywhere for people to isolate who had potentially had COVID.
Right. So that seems backwards to me.
Yeah, so that was it. So I basically waited probably another half an hour or so until kind of kids had gone to bed. So I thought, well, at least they're out of the way, and then we can
have a chat and go I don't know what we're going to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was bizarre, absolutely bizarre. And then we kind of realised, it kind of came to the kind of daunting conclusion, the fact that, you know, I've been living with my family for however many days beforehand, and if I've passed it on, I've probably passed it on already.
Yeah.
You know.
Was there any part of you that was still a bit like, oh no, we best not hug, best not kiss? Or was you just like, not that you don't care?
So we had that kind of, those initial conversations, but then we tried to kind of, we decided we'd have to just kind of live normally and roll the dice, you know. And I say it was terrifying. It was, especially because it was that early on when we didn't know how badly children would be affected. You know, it was.
Did
really,
it affect the way you interacted with your children at all? Were you conscious of, am I going to hug my little boy, or am I going to kiss him too much, or should I bath him, or should my wife just sort that bit out? I don't know.
I think we'd just come to the conclusion that we're in such close contact. You know, you're always hugging and kissing and all that kind of stuff.
Very affectionate family, yeah.
Yeah. So we're just like, you know, they're probably going to have it already if they've got, you know,
go through it together, yeah.
So, and that was it really. And then my wife had the bright idea of using my toothbrush a day after, so that was funny.
She is a unique little egg. I love that girl.
Hers had ran out of battery, so she thought, I'll use the COVID toothbrush right there.
God, I love her.
Yeah, but at that point, kind of testing had started to come in, and they were testing NHS workers and that kind of stuff. So I managed to get myself a test, and ended up being my daughter, who's only one.
Yeah.
Because we were the only ones that had symptoms. She'd had a cough, I think, as well. But my wife was very tired, that kind of stuff. Different symptoms, which at the time she didn't have a cough and didn't have a temperature and didn't have a sore throat.
No.
So they wouldn't test her, and my little boy didn't seem to have any symptoms at all. So, but yeah, my daughter and I both tested positive.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you think she was the start of it all? She's the carrier. She case zero. No, I'm joking. But she obviously, just for anybody that's listening, she's still with us. She's happy and healthy. Everybody's good.
Goodness, yeah, it was an absolute. I was just so relieved that everybody was all right. Really.
How did you feel going through it? So you confirmed case, you felt rough. Your partner felt tired. Some people have really, really struggled out there, and we're not trying to dumb down anybody that's suffering. But how was your experience of going through that isolation and the sort of half-life of the noticeable difference in your physical health, like the cough, the cold, the drowsiness, or whatever?
Yeah, if I'm honest, so I only had a temperature for about 12 hours, and that kind of resolved. The biggest thing for me was just feeling absolutely exhausted, particularly for the first 2 weeks, and then probably.
You think I was just being at home with the kids, though? Or I don't know. There's aspects of it in there.
I don't think so. I was napping a lot more than normal.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been sleeping about 2 or 3 hours every day in the day.
Wow. Okay. Which is very rare for you.
Yeah. Occasionally, I normally only get an hour and a half every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, chance to be a fan thing. Yeah, but this fatigue probably lasted for 6 weeks or more, I would
say.
Really?
Wow.
But not as bad, but the first couple of weeks were really intense. But then, 6 weeks, I would say.
What did you have any approach with it? Is it vitamin C, or did you, I don't know, stay better hydrated? Did you try and self-medicate in any way, shape or form? Because obviously there's no cure for anything. But,
just tried living kind of normally and healthy as,
Yeah. A couple of chocolate oranges for breakfast.
That's it, yeah.
a couple of pints of beer for lunch. No,
5 every day. Yeah, and then...
So how about your children and your partner? Did they...
They were absolutely, they recovered miraculously, really.
Good.
I say, yeah, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Did get a little short of breath myself as well. Just on doing basic things like going upstairs or...
And you usually do a lot of cycling, a lot of running. So again, you're...
So yeah,
for all intents and purposes, you would be the best person to get something like that. So to see that you affected you in that way is surprising.
It is, yeah. In terms of, I know it's, they always say that medical professionals are always kind of the worst patients as well. Because obviously I've got some basic equipment at home as well. In terms of I can do my oxygen levels and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I know, and I was watching them and they were like 93 and 94%. I was like, that's definitely not normal for me.
Yeah, it's a bit low.
And then I start listening to my own chest and I'm like,
yeah.
What can I hear?
I always think they make, not the worst, but they make the worst parents as well, for all due respect, because if a child has anything, like you've got a GP that's got their kid, they can, knowledge is power, but knowledge is also dangerous, because you just start over analysing every single thing they do. That's a deficiency in this, or they're clearly showing that. I think
I've been kind of with, sounds terrible, isn't it? With my own children, kind of been in the kind of both sides of that camp, really, in terms of, I think one time we potentially waited a bit too long when my little boy was struggling with breathing problems and stuff like that. And
because he's got allergies and you're not a sick family by any stretch of the imagination.
But it's just you get wheezy kids, don't you, occasionally, and he's one of them every now and then.
So you went through another period of isolation, and then how do you transition back into work? You get another test to show you've not got it anymore, or
no? So this again, it was all early on. It felt really bizarre. So on day 8, bear in mind they wanted to isolate for 7 days. On day 8, I was back at work.
Okay.
Which just felt really weird.
Yeah. Unsure if anything had gone or was still there.
I didn't want to go to work and infect my colleagues.
No, of course. Yeah.
And I was thinking, and I was saying, do I not need another test?
Yeah.
And now they've obviously extended the guidance to 10 days, haven't they? So
now retrospectively, you're thinking...
probably infectious for 3 days, going back to work and touching all the surfaces and...
Yeah, and all that sort of stuff.
So, yeah, but I certainly know a lot of my colleagues have had COVID, and thankfully been fine.
Have everybody in the sort of, or the majority of NHS staff now been tested? Because I know tests are available for fire service personnel, but nobody's turned up on station to test us all. I know that. I've certainly not received a test.
So lots of people had so obviously testing is only in terms of when you've got symptoms, but lots of people had the antibody test. I'm not sure. I think there was a certain amount they had, but lots of people did have that test if they wanted it, to see if they'd actually had COVID in the past.
You can you get it twice though? I don't know. I don't really know how it works.
If I'm honest, there's little kind of research around it. I think you can get it twice, but there's potentially different strains.
Well, there is with a lot of viruses as well, isn't there? Things are constantly evolving, and it's a living organism effectively. So it is like any organism on the earth. It's going to adapt, isn't it? It's going to change over time. But
hopefully, if you've got antibodies, then you're going to, if it does come around again, you're going to be able to fight it more effectively. So that's
the whole point of any immunisation, isn't it? That's why we give people a little bit of a TB jab, and that's why you get your inoculations when you go abroad. We're just infecting you with something, so your body can build antibodies and hopefully get a bit stronger to fight it should the genuine one arrive.
That's it.
For want of a better description. So you've got some changes in your PPE. How was the rest of the workforce adapting in terms of people were having to self-isolate, so crewing has been affected as well? There must have been an aspect of morale that took a bit of a... Did everybody come together? Or because obviously you get a lot of support from the public, but...
If I'm honest, I think morale throughout, particularly the first few months, was exceptional, really.
That's wonderful.
You know, considering the circumstance and that kind of thing, but we were, assisted in some ways in the fact that, so our kind of normal demand on a day-to-day basis is colossal. You know, as you say, if you're working on a crew or a full-size ambulance, you go in job to job. As soon as you press the button to say you're available, then you're on another job. But demand dropped massively because nobody wanted to go to hospital. People didn't want to.
Mad, isn't it?
Yeah, people didn't want to get COVID, so they didn't want to go to hospital. So nobody rang an ambulance.
Well, far less people rang an ambulance.
Exaggerating, obviously, but
which is great to see that how resourceful people can be if they need to be. And we're not encouraging people to suffer in silence.
It's kind
of course.
Yes and no, really. Yeah, it's that. There were some people that definitely should have been ringing an ambulance and probably didn't, and then perhaps a few days later down the line when they were really poorly, that's when they ended up ringing when they could have perhaps...
Do you find that with a certain generation? Because we often go to some places like that and it would sometimes be an older generation who go, I didn't want to cause a fuss.
Oh, absolutely, I didn't want to wake you up.
Yeah, something like that. Whereas,
don't worry,
with all due respect, younger generations sometimes will get a little bit jumpy or a little bit panicky and ring 999 for lesser priorities, shall we say. Whereas we go to some elderly person and they're really struggling.
Part of it's kind of the life experience, isn't it, in terms of younger... I'm talking about very young people wouldn't obviously have the experience and they might obviously panic and want help immediately, whereas the older people think, as you say, it might get better, or
I'll shake it off.
Yeah, and
see how it is in a few days.
Yeah, but then obviously sometimes they do get better, and hopefully they do all the time. But it's that when they don't, isn't it? And that's when we're there. But it's about that time of kind of when you do access medical help, whether we essentially should be the last resort as 999, but then you're out of hours, your 111s and all that kind of stuff that you hopefully can go to first.
I was never aware until we went out on some of our ride-alongs. Some of the levels of skill set that different paramedics can come with, because you've done a few additional courses. So just to speak for a minute about sort of like the career of a paramedic. How long did your training last before you got in? How long do you need to train for? Because you have to have a degree to do it, don't you?
So nowadays, I think this year...
This did change, didn't it?
I think nowadays, I think it is a full degree, so it's 3 years.
You went back and completed a degree. You're doing a master's now as well, aren't you?
Yeah, so I did a 2-year course. I've got a diploma in higher education of paramedic practice.
Okay.
So I did that as a 2-year course, but then lots of people kind of...
You already had a degree prior to that, didn't you?
Yeah.
You went to university first.
Yeah. Which is hence why I can do a master's now rather than... just doing the top up to a degree. So I've not got a degree in paramedicine.
But there's, like I said, there's a few different avenues to get into it. So you had a degree to start with, then you did a 2-year diploma to become an operational paramedic.
Yeah.
But then even once you're in, there's like different levels of it, isn't it? Because you were telling me about searcher and there's different drugs you can and can't prescribe at different levels. And
paramedics are paramedics. We all work to the same scope of practice.
Okay.
But then you also have kind of critical care paramedics, likes of helicopter paramedics.
What's the difference? Obviously, I get that they're on a helicopter.
Yeah. So they can...
Was it critical? Why?
Yeah,
what can they do?
So they can do kind of increased skills. A lot of the time they work with the doctor as well. I'm not sure exactly of obviously their scope of practice, but they can do things like surgical airways, and they can do thoracostomies, essentially cutting a hole in the side of your chest
cavity to release pressure or whatever.
Yeah, so we can do different things similar to that, but not to that advanced level.
Okay, that does sound pretty intense, to be fair.
Yeah, so they're kind of that higher spectrum, but then there's the other side of it. A lot of them have been kind of phased out now, really. Emergency care practitioners, which are more kind of your urgent type paramedics, essentially, who will go and give antibiotics and prescribe stuff rather than administer stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, so... That's what we can't do. Like we can't leave,
somebody with drugs.
Yeah, we can't leave somebody with like of ibuprofen or whatever.
Yeah. What are the normal drugs that your bog standard, with all due respect, paramedic can give? Because I know that's kind of the big thing. I remember when we did handover shifts and stuff like that. They're the main bits you have to sign over and sign for, because there's obviously drugs on the ambulance.
Yeah. So we've got like, I wouldn't even hesitate
loads.
to think, yeah, like 100 or something.
Really?
Yeah, loads, absolutely loads, different things.
Crikey! So
and some, some you'll use, day in day out. Others you might not use for 4 or 5 years, depending on the situation.
So what's the sort of day-to-day drugs that a paramedic might need to use, and what are they for?
Paracetamol.
You still give out paracetamols? Yeah.
But it's always a bit of a burden if you have to open your own bag to get paracetamol, because then you have to check all the drugs. It's like a bit of a nightmare. So you're always like, have you got any paracetamol?
On your truck, because I don't want to get mine out.
When I were the patient.
The paracetamol, right, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so they might use their paracetamol first. But yeah, so things like chest pain, so aspirin, GTN. So I think when you came out, you saw that, didn't you? So spray under the tongue. Yeah,
glycerin trinitrate, isn't it?
Glycerol trinitrate,
vasodilator thing for heart attacks when people
chest pains. Basically it opens up all the veins and then lets
you have some crazy words for certain things as well, because I remember when we said basically a complicated word for a heart attack,
myocardial infarction.
It's just ridiculous. There's no need for that.
There's a posh word for everything. It's like,
do you just say that so the patient doesn't know what you're saying?
Epistaxis. What's epistaxis?
Epistaxis.
Yeah.
I always try and break the word down. So I imagine it's the same thing as EpiPen. Obviously, it's not an EpiPen, but the word sounds as epistat. I don't know.
Nosebleed.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Why not just say nosebleed?
Hematemesis.
Something blood.
Vomiting
as
blood.
Hematemesis, right?
But there's loads of words, just massively complicated.
Unnecessary. Yeah. Myocardial infarction. Yeah, I remember that.
Diaphoresis. That's another classic.
Do some people pull these out of the bag? Do you ever get the odd, like, with all due respect, like first responder trying to act like a paramedic sometimes? Do you ever turn up something and they start banging out some big words and you look at them like, right, shall I take it from here? Because you're saying lots of words that don't really relate to this patient.
Well, more than that. So I've had a student out with me recently, and she's, obviously as she's learning, she writes some of the paperwork and then I review it afterwards, and then she'll write something and I was like, what does that mean? Don't know what that big word is.
Yeah, that's unnecessary. Don't complicate it.
It's true. Yeah, you need to write plain English. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. There's certain words that you would just use naturally and they become plain English. But there's certain, everybody needs to be able to understand it.
So we've got the GTN spray, low level drugs. You do carry like adrenaline. Do you carry adrenaline there?
Yeah. Adrenaline, 2 different types.
I was thinking that'd be awesome. I've never used adrenaline, obviously, because I've never had a medical reason for it. But somebody said to me recently, they said, something like over a 60-year lifespan, the average person will use actually less than a thimbleful of adrenaline. It says it's not.
I think I probably use more than average, if I'm honest.
Use a lot of that. What do you administer adrenaline for?
So a few different things actually. So life-threatening asthma, we can give adrenaline.
Okay.
Anaphylaxis.
What? Just because it massively opens up all the airways?
So it kind of does a couple of things. So it opens up the airways, but also a vasoconstrictor. So it constrict all your veins, make your blood pressure.
It's exactly why I get an ice cold water, because it spikes your adrenaline.
Yeah.
I know I'm getting you over for an ice cold bath. you get in, 0 degree water, the massive spike in cortisol and adrenaline.
Yeah.
If you've got anything wrong with you in the morning, wow, it just opens up all the airways, because exactly that, massive vasoconstriction. All the airways open up.
Yeah.
So you give it for that.
Blood rush to your core.
Yeah.
So I say anaphylaxis. So obviously severe life-threatening allergic reactions.
Yeah.
And
so that's where the EpiPens obviously come in as well.
It's exactly the same stuff. Yeah.
Must be a very small amount in EpiPen though, in comparison to what you guys carry.
They are 300 micrograms and we give 500 micrograms, but I think most people tend to have 2 EpiPens, whereas we can give, I think it's something like 11 doses of adrenaline or something like that if we need to. I'd have to check my guidelines.
Just keep giving it in. As long as they don't die, but you're just trying to keep them alive, basically.
Yeah. And then the other side of it, we give it in cardiac arrest as well, but intravenously, so into the vein.
Okay.
Which is hopefully just stimulates some electrical activity in the heart, so then we can get it started again.
What are some of the more complicated cases that you've been to? Because I think of like a heart attack. It's kind of like your bread and butter. I mean, whilst it's probably one of the worst ends of the spectrum, I think we struggle with casualty care because we struggle with stuff in the fire service when it's kind of middle of the road, we don't know what on earth is going on, and you'll obviously identify it straight away. But I always say to people, look, if they're having a heart attack, it's kind of good. Sounds horrible for us because we kind of know what to do. Just get the defib out, and if they pass out, stick it on and keep them alive, give them CPR. Obviously, you guys do a great deal more than that.
Yeah, so I think there's kind of a bit of perhaps misinterpretation in terms of heart attack and cardiac arrest there as well. So you're talking about, so your cardiac arrest when your heart's obviously stopped.
Yeah, starts to go into fibrillation.
Yeah, and then your heart attack when it's still working, but it's kind of one of the main arteries around the heart is kind of occluded or partially occluded.
Because that was one of the things that really threw me. When you guys do like 9-point and 12-point or something like that, and you get all kinds of readings.
12 lead ECGs, yeah.
That's what I said, yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the readings that you were talking about and being able to read those charts.
Oh, yeah, it's a wiggly line, yeah.
Yeah, what obviously I get what's going on there, but what are the different readings again? Because that one completely blows my mind because they're obviously all different indicators to what you're supposed to do with them.
Yeah, so obviously everybody in like a normal working heart has a standard kind of way the electrical rhythm works. It obviously starts at the top and then moves down and essentially goes down two different branches. Yeah. And on an ECG, that shows us a certain shape of wiggly line.
So an ECG, is it echocardiogram?
Electrocardiogram.
Electrocardiogram,
yeah.
So close.
Echo's on with the doodah.
The doodah when they put it, that's external, isn't it?
Yes.
Echo, yeah. Whereas, ECG, you're measuring the electrical activity of the heart of the body.
Yeah, from different locations. So it's called 12 lead ECG, even though there's only 10 actual leads for good measure. So, but
to call it 12 and only 10.
Yeah, but because there's 12 different views on the ECG.
Right.
Yeah.
Just to add some more complexity.
Yeah. It's an absolute mind boggle when you first get into it. But yeah, essentially, if somebody's having a heart attack, you should be able to recognise on an ECG, or most of the time you can recognise on an ECG that it's actually happening and whereabouts in the heart it's coming from.
Well, would that change what way you administer the drug, or?
Yeah, potentially. So if it's inferior, so from kind of the bottom of the heart, you will only give like one spray of your GTN, for example.
Okay. Because that obviously just affects a different part of the body, I'm guessing.
If I'm honest, I'm not quite sure probably the background behind that, but
That's
I
what
think
you do.
it can reduce your blood pressure too much if you do that. So all these drugs that we give, we all kind of have guidelines,
of course,
to follow. So whenever we're given a drug and stuff, we check our guidelines.
So how much of your day-to-day role do you think people are aware of when they first get into the job? From when you were thinking about when you first joined, is there much difference in your perception of what a paramedic did versus what you've experienced in your 6 years so far?
Yeah, so I think, I don't really watch many of the kind of ambulance-y type programs now. Maybe they're a bit better nowadays, but I think people think of a paramedic and think of like casualty and that kind of stuff when you go into trauma all the time and car
same
crashes.
as us. People think it's London's burning. They think that's what I think of all the time.
Yeah, exactly. But in reality, there's a lot of kind of your elderly,
a lot of sitting in lounges.
Simple falls and that kind of stuff. Chatting to people. I went to an old lady the other week that had she pressed 111 because I can't remember what it was. It was like a breathing problem, something to that effect. But when I got there, she was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I wish I'd called back now. I feel better now." But she'd been living on her own for like however many, and not isolating, but she got family coming in occasionally. She'd cancelled the carers because of COVID and all that kind of stuff. And I basically sat and had a cup of tea. Yeah, and had a chat with her because it's when
you talk about care, that can be a really crucial part of care.
And that's her mental health, and I'm probably going to be the only person she's going to see in the week, in certainly the next few days. And you think, she deserves that time, and it's so that's that privilege to spend that time with those people and
on the other end of
that support.
On the other end of the spectrum, what are some of the more challenging things you've been? Because you went to a really, really difficult burns victim at one point in time, I remember you saying.
Oh, yeah. I've been to, if I'm honest, I've been to probably all sorts, probably most things you could imagine at this stage. You
had a gentleman jump off a building once, I thought, as well.
Several times. Several times of that at different points, yeah.
They've got to be fairly harrowing things to turn up to, because we, of course, observe a lot as firefighters, but we kind of work around you guys and girls, sorry, in that until it comes to extricating the casualty, or unless they're in a point where you can't access them, as in they're in too much danger. Obviously, you have heart teams and stuff like that as well, but we tend to be working on the outskirts, and we sort of scurry you in the middle and put you right in the coalface.
Yeah.
So when you go to a road traffic collision, or when somebody's...
Well, last week, for example, I was in a car side on in the ditch, trying to treat this patient. The fire service around me, cutting the different.
It's always bonkers.
Pillar off and all that kind of stuff.
Your PPE is never quite up to scratch.
You always whack us in the head with stuff as well, though.
Well, you're in the way, aren't you? You're in the goddamn way. Trying to make you guys. You have got a lot better in the last probably 5 years, but I'll tell you what, your PPE used to be horrific. Yeah. We'd all be dressed up to the nines, you know what I mean, in fireproof this, cut-proof that, helmets, goggles, gloves, and you're just in there in...
High-vis.
In the invincible high-vis. With the... But you guys, you go from patient to patient. I mean, obviously things have changed with COVID, but it did always astonish me that we take our uniform off and leave it at work, but there's a massive expectation for you guys to decontaminate and clean everything yourself.
Yeah. If I'm honest, I think a lot of that kind of side of things is that initial pressure as you arrive on scene. There's people screaming, and also you've probably, especially now at the moment, I work on a car. I can't get, dressed into my PPE en route and put my helmet on and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of assess that risk as I initially see things.
Live, as you arrive.
Yeah. So, and I think, the rules say if you're on a motorway, you should be all the time wearing a helmet and stuff like that. But in reality, it depends what I rock up to. How poorly somebody is, and whether I think the roof's going to be getting cut off or whatever. And then, yes, I will wear a helmet, but it's that.
It's very dynamic.
Yeah.
Very dynamic.
Dynamic risk assessment, and also that people don't realise the emotional side of it as well, because people think you're a paramedic, but you're a person first.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It's like dealing with that emotion and trying to hide the fact that you've got all this adrenaline rushing through your system, and you and everybody else, there's people screaming and all that kind of stuff, and it's about, and
they're looking at you as the point of expertise. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so we can dissipate it in a team because we're all working together to achieve a collective goal.
There's always that massive release of kind of tension, isn't there, when the first emergency services arrive on scene, because
you're going to fix everything.
Yeah,
absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And you're carrying your own bags, and you're just rocking up, and just one person or even two sometimes, but they're often there sending messages or trying to get more kit off the ambulance, and you're there by yourself, surrounded by a bunch of optimistic but fairly useless firefighters in terms of first aid care in what we're qualified to. How often do you find that mismatching skills? Because we've done a little bit of training together before as well, but I often think it's something we're trying to get better at, and certainly in my service there's been a greater focus on casualty care as you guys and girls have become more overstretched, and we've tried to step in more and more. Why do you think it's so rare that we don't do a lot more shared training? Because we really should.
Yeah, we definitely should, but it is, I think, it literally down to people, the fact that we can't literally afford to stand people down from the road because we are so operationally busy.
Yeah.
So if people do any training, they're doing it in their own time, and it's a sad state of affairs, but it is what it is. They need bums on seats.
Do you think they struggle with recruitment now? I mean, either in your service or nationally, I don't know how up to date you stay with statistics.
I don't necessarily if they struggle with recruitment. I think they struggle to get people through the system quick enough to become qualified, because especially in years gone by, initially people would only ever train in service and go kind of up the ranks, as it were, but then kind of things went more towards the university side. You still can obviously train in service.
It used to be a smoother transition from like an EMT into a paramedic, didn't it? It was like a career progression.
Yeah, you used to start as, I'm trying to think of the correct name for it, PTS, Patient Transport Services. So, you'd go pick up your people and take them into hospitals to their appointments and blah, blah, blah. So you'd drive the ambulance for a bit and help people on and push wheelchairs and that kind of stuff. And then you'd gradually kind of increase your skills and go on to A&E work, accident emergency work. And then obviously, breast technician and then paramedic. But then a lot of stuff nowadays has gone to university, but there was that kind of gap in between where there physically wasn't enough university courses to train enough paramedics. So there's certainly been a shortage of paramedics. So, if anybody wants to, is a budding paramedic, go for it.
Do you think it's as much of an attractive, obviously you're in there and you've had some wonderful experiences which have kept you committed to the role, but do you think it's as much of an attractive career? Because I know in the fire service, we had struggled. We've been getting a lot better in the past 2 years, perhaps. We went through a period of time where the wage as a firefighter and also just retention, people coming in with the perception of what the fire service was versus what they experience in day to day. Do you think in terms of retention and job attraction from wages and stuff like that, is it as attractive as it once was?
I think people do want to do it, don't they? 'Cause, I absolutely love it. I think it's great. I can't see myself moving out of this kind of field.
Yeah.
Certainly not till I'm older and ready to sit behind a desk somewhere.
Because you kind of want to marry up some of your older skills as well. Because I know you've got a desire to get onto the helicopters. Because obviously you've got absolutely. Some experience in the air from the RAF days, and I suppose the goal is to try and get those. You have to be in for a number of years. It's quite a complex thing to apply for, isn't it?
Yeah, so you have to do at least, it depends on the application in particular, but at least 5 years experience is normal. And it kind of, obviously, when your helimed paramedic stuff comes out, every man and his dog wants to go for it because it's just awesome, isn't it? Who wouldn't want to be sat in a helicopter and work every day? Yeah. Especially, as paramedic, and you've got that kind of skill set anyway. So yeah, it's definitely an ambition of mine, and I've been doing various different courses to try and kind of get myself into that line of work, but the kind of recruitment is few and far between and that kind of stuff. So initially, you just need to get your feet under the table and become a good paramedic before you then think of doing anything more specialist. So for anybody that would be looking to get into the work, the service, because people have become a lot more appreciative of what you do, as rightly they should be during this pandemic, and they've seen the crucial role that all emergency services play, but especially NHS. What's the best way for people to express an interest or get in contact now? So my biggest bit of advice would just be get some experience in healthcare generally, whether it be working as a healthcare assistant or as a carer or something to that effect before you do anything. And then you'll kind of get some idea of what we're going to do, because we still do all that kind of stuff. If somebody's sold themselves, we still clean them up and stuff, as long as they're not, it's life threatening, all that kind of stuff. You still do all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And if you're happy to do that, then crack on, But then there's 2 routes. You either go to university, like I did, or you can join the ambulance service and down kind of the bottom of the ladder and work well, really. And what they do still support your qualifications and development inside the service, do they? Or how do you mean? In terms of, so you can formally go and seek education yourself at university. Oh yeah. But is there a progressive development plan in terms of like a diploma that you did? Do they still have that transition? Yeah. So certainly nowadays it's getting a lot better, and a lot of the stuff is affiliated with universities now, even if like technicians, so they do technician to para within like my ambulance service, and that's paid for by the ambulance service. So no, it's a good way to do it. And you still can get universities that are sponsored by an ambulance service, so you get like a bursary and they pay for your fees and that kind of stuff. Where they would be nowadays, I wouldn't know, but I was fortunate enough to go kind of down that route as well. Yeah. But yeah, there's lots of opportunities out there, and if you want to join the ambulance service, do it. Yeah. It's great to see that they're finally supporting and giving those opportunities to people, because I think now more than ever, it's time for people to really appreciate what it is, and if they ever had that urge to get involved, now is the time more than ever. Eddie, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing that insight into the world of paramedic life and what it's like to be out there in the front line, especially now when I think members of the community are really appreciating what you do. So thank you for coming and sharing it with brother. You're very welcome. And I look forward to seeing you on job soon. Indeed.
Well, there we have it, folks. One more episode in the bank. A really powerful episode from one of our brave men and women out there on the front line, keeping us safe on the ambulances, in the ambulance cars, every single day when we need them. Thank you for coming back to the Firefighters Podcast. I hope you took some value away from it. I hope you feel inspired. I hope you feel motivated. I hope you feel eternally grateful for the work our emergency services personnel do for us every day. Be sure to jump over to the Instagram page, check out the Facebook page, check out the YouTube page, check out yourself. And I hope you get some value from the episodes that are coming up. It has been a pleasure having your listening attention, and I look forward to seeing you again really soon. Stay happy, stay healthy, stay hungry, and look after each other.